Greetings to all our learners. Welcome to CEC lecture. Dear learners, the topic of analysis is Territoriality and International Relations. In the lecture, we shall explain the importance of territoriality in the field of international relations. The lecture shall deliberate on the challenges as well for the concepts of state, sovereignty, territorial exclusivity with respect to both theories and practice of international relations. We shall try to understand that how territory is an important aspect with respect to states' recognition and state standing in IR, how boundaries today are being redefined as we enter a borderless world of space-time compression, understanding the impact of globalization on sovereignty, territoriality, and with the bigger picture that is coming forward with respect to new aspects, new challenges which are involved in global governance. To begin with, let us ask the question, what does one mean by territory? A layman understanding of territory it is that it is an area, an administrative division which is under the jurisdiction for the brevity of analysis with respect to our international relations, that is area administrative division under the jurisdiction of a sovereign state. Dear learners, the concept of state sovereignty is fundamental to the international relations study, theory and practice. It has a bearing and relationship to the aspect that is a nation state and to the bigger picture of territorial exclusivity. The concept of state sovereignty has a bearing and reference to the aspect of geographical boundaries also. Territoriality seen in this regard no doubt is one of the building blocks as well as the starting point for study and analysis in international relations. States must possess population, a defined territory, a government and the capacity to conduct international relations. These four core elements of the state, namely population, territory, government, sovereignty, are indeed very essential with respect to the standing of a respective nation state in global relations. Now, when we try to talk about territory, which is not only about land and its related jurisdiction, one must also see that there are various types of territory with respect to nation states and its related jurisdictional aspects, namely capital territory, dependent territory, disputed territory, maritime territory, occupied territory, overseas territory. Now, when we have a look at these different types of territory, one gets the sense that alongside this, there are new challenges for territorial exclusivity in the contemporary times. Earlier, territorial jurisdiction was like an absolute concept. However, when we look at the post-Second World War world, which was defined by Cold War as an ideological war, a propaganda war between two competing ideologies, capitalism versus communism. In the post-Cold War era, one finds that United States emerges as the main superpower, as well as there is rise of multiple new alternate centers of power. Now, within this post-Second World War era, namely the Cold War and its related aftermath, one has to see that with time there was rise of processes that led to rise of transnational relations, establishment of WTO from the GATT and Uruguay rounds, rise of international organizations, examples of supranational governance with the Maastricht Treaty paving way for the European Union, the debates with respect to economic integration and interdependence. So what we see here is that in this context, the aspect that is how much Territory is important with respect to status understanding of IR, or that can we see territorial jurisdiction in a context of the world, namely which was defined by space and time compression, a world which was seen as a borderless world, wherein the process of global trade and finance, the apparatus of transnational relations was not ensuring that the ambit of global governance with respect to state cannot be just reduced to territorial perspective also. Further, when non-state actors also, the transnational actors, namely multinational cooperation, global trade and finance apparatus, the rise of 24/7 banking and trade apparatus, were having a spell on the policy-making apparatus both at domestic and international relations. Herein, once again, territorial jurisdiction was under scanner. With respect to IR theory, when we see the realist perspective, which was based on statism, self-help and survival. Here in the state sovereignty, when we look at this realist perspective, herein we see that it was the core concept of the study of political science both at domestic and global relations. Herein once again, state sovereignty, which was seen in absolute sense, when we look at the work of Thomas Hobbes amongst others, we find that this idea of absolute concept of sovereignty, sovereign as the absolute power, was challenged, and related to it the aspect that the sovereignty is related to territoriality, and its related notion of territoriality was also questioned. Constructivism as a theory perspective in international relations presents an important analysis that state sovereignty, both in its internal and external form, is a socially constructed trait. Herein, dear learners, we must take into account that the social constructivist IR theory, it impresses upon all the learners that international relations are socially contextual. They are basically social and not material. So, seen in this reference, one has to take into account that today, so not only sovereignty, but its very related and essential hallmark, that is territorial jurisdictions, territoriality, is under scanner in international relations. Let's take reference to an important work by S. Tierney, that is Reframing Sovereignty, Sub-State National Societies and the Contemporary Challenges to the Nation States. This comes from International and Comparative Law Quarterly 2000. Now, herein the very important idea that how today rise of sub-state nationalism, it is not only casting doubts on our understanding of sovereignty in the absolute sense, but the sub-state nationalism which are having jurisdictional claims with respect to territory also, they are important challenges to nation state both at domestic and global realms. Another important issue that we must take into account as we debate territoriality and international relations, dear learners, this is the issue of principle of humanitarian intervention. And the main argument of this debate here is that humanitarian intervention violates the principle of non-intervention, as we cite Article 2, Clause 7 of United Nations Charter, which prevents the United Nations from intervening in matters within the domestic jurisdiction of a state. There are critiques that often argue that how, with respect to humanitarian intervention, the aspect of issue of exclusivist understanding both of sovereignty and territoriality with respect to the bigger picture of domestic jurisdiction of a state somewhere gets under scanner, because today humanitarian intervention moral obligations are having a transnational connotation, and further humanitarian intervention and moral obligation are indeed a complex and contested aspect. An important work that we take into account to take our discussion forward on territoriality and international relations. Dear learners, this is the work that is by Miles Cahar, Barbara F. Walter, named Territoriality and Conflict in an Era of Globalization. This is from Cambridge University Press, 2006. Now, the debate that the book also highlights, that is, there were lots of doubts that globalization would undermine territorial attachments, and that globalization, the process of rise of integration and interaction between nation states, powered by rise of new forms of communication, technology and other advancements, may have produced changes in territoriality and functions of the border. But the argument that the book really points out, but that no doubt it has led to changes, but it has not eliminated the aspect of territory and the importance of border. The argument that the book focuses and presents, and we must also take this into account as we do our research papers and answers on territoriality and international relations, is that territorial attachments are constructed. This is why they have remained so powerful even in the context of a world which was witnessing increasing process of globalization, and above all, what impact continuing strong attachments further may have on future conflicts also. Territorial attachments and people's willingness to fight for a territory, as the book presents this argument, it depends upon the symbolic role it plays in formulating, making and constituting people's identity, and most important, factoring in a sense of recognition, an idea of belonging in a world which is increasingly globalized. Another important work to add more inputs into our debate on territoriality and international relations, dear learners, this is by Hans Lancher, that is Beyond Globalization, Capitalism, Territoriality and International Relations of Modernity. This is from Routledge, 2006. Now, in this work, we get the sense that as a new critical social theory of international relations that problematizes, questions the prevailing conceptions of modern international political economy, that is, as a collection of nationally bounded spaces. The argument that the book tries to present to us, that capitalist modernity itself, when we try to look at it from a historical perspective, seen right from the beginning, was characterized by a certain dualism, and dualism of global economic integration and fragmentation of political space. This actually stems from the divergent origins of capitalism and territorial sovereignty. We must take this input as we are writing our answers on territoriality and international relations. Another important work which can also be said to be highlighting on a specific case study is that by Michael Burgess, Hans Wohler, State Territoriality and European Integration, from Routledge, 2006. Now, this work, taking an example of Europe, it gives us the sense that how Europe, which is, namely when we look at with respect to the interconnected processes of globalization, European integration, and above all that how the conventional territorial base of the state, when we try to have a case study of European Union, how this is being reappraised. And in this aspect, the bigger question, the arguments of debate that this work gives us insight into, it is namely, that is whether the era of Europeanization, globalization, does it signify the end of the citizens' traditional attachment to their national territory, and the bigger picture, that is, the conceptions of the state no longer correspond to contemporary political realities. An important aspect, as we take our discussion on territoriality and international relations forward, we get this aspect from this work, that is, beyond territoriality, transnational legal authority in an age of globalization. Now, we all know, as this book points out, that today there has been evolution of transnational legal authority, and the context of it could be the course of globalization. What is essential for us to factor in, that is, when transnational authority is multifaceted. Now, in that aspect, the concept of territoriality, extraterritoriality as a global governance phenomena also witnesses challenges and new issues. An important aspect that we get from the work of J.V. Hagen and Stephen Emmerfall, that is, territoriality in the globalizing society, one place or none. Now, this work tells us that globalization indeed was one of the buzzwords when we look at the time framework from 1990s onwards. Globalization was accompanied by increasing regionalization also. The argument that we get, that is, from this work on territoriality in the globalizing society, one place or none, is that location and space will remain important dimension of economic and social development. As we take our discussion forward on territoriality and international relations, the work by Irene Calboli and Edward Lee, that is, trademark protection and territoriality challenges in a global economy. This is from Edward Elgar Publishing, 2014, that is, rise of international trade, rise of globalization has indeed changed the way trademark laws, as we take an important example from this book, how, for example, a trademark law functions in a number of important areas, which includes protection of well-known marks, parallel imports, enforcement of trademark rights again. So, herein what we see that how today in a global economy there are important challenges, and these challenges are not just related to the economic processes also, but its related apparatus, and this related apparatus for that matter trademark protection, it offers a question mark on the exclusive territorial jurisdiction of the state apparatus also. An important work to add more inputs to our debate on territoriality and international relations. This work is from Abdul Hamid Ekoli, that is, Territorial Integrity in a Globalizing World, International Law and States' Quest for Survival. The author argues that biggest threat that many states are confronted today is disintegration rather than their obsolescence. What is essential here, that is, as the author points out, that international law has not been able to prevent this eventuality. The flexibility of territoriality, that is, their ability to adjust to difficult situations as they arise. Increasing number of states today to revive territorial autonomy. This is an important concern. So, dear learners, as we are taking our discussion forward on territoriality, we find here that states are an important actor with respect to international relations. The state has important elements, as we discuss: population, government, territory and sovereignty. With respect to sovereignty, which is indeed one of the key hallmarks with reference to understanding of the state's power and state's recognition with respect to global realms. Now, this sovereignty, both as a principle of international law as well as the principle of the aspect of conduct of international relations, is related to territoriality aspect. Territorial sovereignty, it denotes the political and legal expression which designates not only relationship of power, supremacy or independence between an actor and state, object and the territory, but this territorial integrity, it is the principle under international law that prohibits, say, from the use of force against territorial integrity or political independence of another state. Territorial integrity is also enshrined in Article 2 of the United Nations Charter, and it has been recognized as customary international law. Now, with respect to sovereignty, one has to see that both within the aspect of theory and practice of international relations, right from rise of human rights, rise of international organization, they are having a dual effect of not only sovereignty, but they are also presenting question marks on territoriality aspect also, namely with respect to the ability of transnational forces in their attempt to interfere in the domestic and global policy making apparatus. And above all, the question that is, can then one say that a state has claim to exclusive territorial jurisdiction, because the idea of jurisdiction and law also is witnessing impact from the transnational forces and transnational apparatus. No doubt the concept of sovereignty, which has a historical connotation to it, when we take reference to James Bertelson's work, one gets the sense that today's sovereignty is also under scanner. Feminists have critiqued the understanding of sovereignty from the realist perspective as gendered. Stephen Krasner presents 4 attributes of sovereignty. Here in this aspect, what one finds here is that today, with transnational relations coming forward, the aspect of humanitarian activity, global trade and global finance apparatus is witnessing effect which are transcending borders, and to add to that, the complexities within the understanding of moral obligation, within the working of various processes of globalization, within the framework of apparatus of global trade and finance, are indeed having a question mark on the ability and the efforts of the governments to not only manage relations at the domestic level, but also at the global level. So what finds here is that the principle of sovereignty, which was a turning point in the human history, which also had this very important idea of territoriality, this is witnessing important challenges. Now with this, one has to see that the idea of territory has to be seen in the aspect that the paradigm and the context of international relations has indeed magnified. No doubt territoriality remains as one of the important building blocks of our understanding of international relations, but one has to see that there are challenges for territorial exclusivity because of transnational relations, rising interdependence, because of idea of constructed parameter, rise of sub-state nationalism, humanitarian intervention, territorial attachment somewhere are under scanner. Debates on interconnected process of alternative process of regionalization, the aspect of modernity, and the bigger aspect that how legal authorities also witnessing transnational influence. So in such time, what one finds that the aspect that states, independent states, the essence of power, IR, and territoriality as essential for the nature and character of the states, no doubt it is defining attribute of the Westphalian conception of IR and the state, but at the same time there are multiple challenges owing to changing realities in international relations. The state is still important, sovereignty and territoriality are still important, but at the same time, one cannot ignore that how in a borderless world there are space-time compression, and above all how the aspect of globalization also has been challenged with the rise of populism. So herein what we see that territoriality also as a defining attribute of Westphalian state and its related aspect of sovereignty is also being constantly debated and redefined. And dear learners, we hope the lecture on territoriality and international relations gave you significant inputs and insight. We look forward to positive, encouraging feedback from you all. Thank you very much.